I'm live. I'm reading out of Eyes of Horus, and I stopped it after I did the second reading, and this is now the last reading of this chapter, chapter 6 of Joan Marshall Grants' book entitled Eyes of Horus. This is her own far memory of Egypt 3,500 years ago, and it's very fascinating. In this life, she is a male, and this part 6 is entitled Torchbearer. He is now married to Mary, and he is in the royal city, and they are starting a battle. The army of the hare was taking the west road, so although they would pass through part of the oryx, we should not join them until we reached the meeting place. The captain of the jackal were all well known to Hanuk, so they had agreed with enthusiasm to acknowledge him as captain of the nome as well as nomarch. Although Hanuk and myself and the new nomarch of the hare were of equal rank, each being captain of a nome, I was the only one who had held the rank during the old reign, and it was because of this that Rodan had put me in authority over the others. An hour before noon, marching at the head of the column between Hanuk and Sebek, I took the road to the north. Sebek had trained his men to keep in step, and to the rhythm of their sandaled feet they sang the traditional warrior songs. After the soldiers who marched 4 abreast, each 100 under its own leader, came Kias, with her following of women. They were singing the same songs as the men, and I was amused to see that she had taught them to keep even more precise ranks than my soldiers. When I commented on this to Sebek, he grinned and said, "By the time she's finished with us, we shall all be trained as dancers. I pretend that I don't know she has been teaching some of them to use a bow. Many of them learn more quickly than men, though of course they can't fly an arrow so far." "If Menhead looks like defeating us," I said jestingly, "we can call on them instead of sending for reinforcements from the leopard." "You wouldn't have to call on them, they'd not wait for the asking. If we get hard pressed, they will do more than carry arrows, and the knives they have been whetting so carefully will slit more than a duck's throat. It's lucky for the husbands that their women have followed them out of love, else they would have found one of Kia's soldiers as rough bedfellow. Of Kia's soldiers as rough bedfellows. Do you think Menhead will fight? If he doesn't, I'll barter my captain's omelette for a sickle and cut down corn instead of rebels." "Aren't we the rebels?" He looked startled and said, "For a moment I thought you were serious. Us, rebels? We're loyal Egyptians who refuse any longer to see our country being ruled by impostors. Driving out the invader, that's what we're doing. What does it matter if they're Egyptian-born or belong to the people whose name must never be spoken? By the way, it's such a long time since their name was spoken that I don't know who they were. Do you?" I shook my head, and he went on, "As I was saying, it doesn't matter whether the usurper is a foreigner or an Egyptian. If he can use his powers properly, he's got to go. Personally, I hope we'll have a chance of harrying his flight. Many's the time I'd would have liked to kill Menhead, and now perhaps I'll have a chance to do so." He lapsed into silence. Hanuk seemed to be lost in his own thoughts, and I wondered if he would have found Sebek's comments interesting. Kias would not lack for champions in the coming battle. When we reached our destination, it was to find that the army of the hare had arrived before us. Quarters had been arranged in the house of the captains for Kias and her women, and the rest of us were sleeping in the open. On long marches, each soldier carried a blanket as well as his cloak, and these were now set out in orderly rows with their owners' weapons beside them. The hare on the west of the practice ground, ourselves on the east. Fires had been lit, over which small cattle were being roasted on spits, and by each fire were baskets of loaves, lettuce, and onions, and jars of beer. Ever since we had entered the Jackal, the roads had been lined with crowds who had come to acclaim Hanuk, and it was easy to see there was widespread rejoicing that he was now their nomarch. Next to the house of the captains, a large pavilion had been set up, in which an informal banquet would be held in his honor. Before this began, he received the oath of fealty from the overseers of nearby towns, who had taken this opportunity to greet him. Kia sat next to him, as though they were already formally betrothed, though she was wearing a plain yellow tunic which, except for the gold oryx clasp on her shoulder, was the same as those worn by her soldiers. She looked worthy to rule not only a nome, but to have been the royal wife. None of the other captains had women with them, so at the banquet, Kia's was the only woman present. All of us gave the same consideration to her suggestions for the strategy we might adapt as though she had been a man, but I think a few of them forgot that she was a woman, and beautiful. I drank a silent toast to Ra, asking that she might marry Hanuk. Each was a perfect complement to the other, like enough to have been brother and sister, though he, the tallest man in the Oryx, had already a cubit more in height. Soon after we had finished eating, there was a shout outside, taken up by many voices. "A messenger for the captain of the Oryx!" A panting runner came into the pavilion and gave the message into my hand. I read it aloud. "The younger prince stabbed his brother to death, and has proclaimed himself to be the lord of the two lands. Many of those loyal to Amar Mehmet have fled from the royal city, and Menhet has given orders that all those captured are to be killed as traitors, though there is news that the royal gnomes are letting many of them escape to the south without hindrance. Menhet has raised his standard in the royal city, and the whole of the royal army has declared itself loyal to him, except for a few who have either been massacred or managed to escape. It seems that Menhet has not yet decided whether to march north or south, and his army is encamped near the royal city. It is thought he is waiting for news from the Norse, as he still hopes that it will join him. Amar Mehmet asked that you will bring the royal army to battle, for the North is waiting to join the winning side, and if you delay, they may decide against our pharaoh, and so the red crown and the white will once more be divided against each other." I raised my cup. "I give you Amar Mehmet, pharaoh, under whose rule Egypt will be reborn. I give you the watchers of the horizon who march to battle at dawn." The Oryx Marches is the next chapter.